The first migrant facility for children has opened its doors under Biden's administration. Now, let me be clear, this is not the first migrant facility for children. This is actually the same facility that was used by the Trump administration in the summer of 2019, and that led to quite a bit of backlash. Immigrant activists speaking out against Donald Trump and his administration for using this facility because it's essentially this giant 66-acre plot of land out of sight, out of mind for many people, that consists mostly of giant tents and some trailers. And if Trump got a lot of backlash for it, it is a little strange that the media's attention to this is a little different. But let me give you the details on what we know so far. The emergency facility is located in Carrizo Springs, Texas. The emergency facility, it's a vestige of the Trump administration that was open for only a month in the summer of 2019. And now it's being reactivated to hold up to 700 children ages 13 to 17. Now, it's worth taking a look inside this facility, which reporters were able to do back in the summer of 2019 when Trump was in charge. So take a close look and we'll discuss why the Biden administration is reactivating this particular facility again.
The reason for Carrizo Springs and the reason why we stood this up is, again, not to allow children to stay in Border Patrol stations any longer than they need to. Again, Border Patrol stations are designed for a quick processing. They're not designed for care of children. The reason why we need this shelter today is because the capacity of our shelter system is running pretty full given the recent surge of unaccompanied children coming across the border.
Separating children, especially young children, who have no say-so oftentimes and come to this country from their families is not appropriate. We are better than that as a country. I hope we are. It accomplished nothing other than spend a lot of money and caused everybody to get mad at one another across this country. And it dumped on HHS because they weren't equipped nor prepared to receive 2,500 children into their care.
So there's a similar blame game going on right now, but one thing to know is that immediately after Biden was elected, there was an influx of unaccompanied minors coming into the country. And so the argument here is, well, with this coronavirus pandemic and the distancing guidelines that we're trying to follow, we really have no choice but to reactivate this facility. Government officials say the camp is needed because facilities for migrant children have had to cut capacity by nearly half because of the coronavirus pandemic. At the same time, the number of unaccompanied children crossing the border has been inching up, with January reporting the highest total, more than 5,700 apprehensions for that month in recent years. So Ryan, I mean, as I read the details of this story, I mean, I understand the reasons that the Biden administration might be citing. But at the same time, I mean, is there any way to avoid this? Is there any way to avoid apprehending these kids and putting them in these facilities, which, you watch that video, keep in mind, they tried to make that facility look good in that video. But as you can tell, you got that security guard with all of the surveillance footage behind him. I mean, it's really not this free and open, wonderful place for these kids to be. And it's not a licensed facility either, because it's considered a temporary facility, even though on average, kids spend about 102 days there.
Right, and the way to avoid it is a way that it isn't even something that's conceivable in our political conversation. I mean, you'd have to go back and you'd have to say, look, the United States government has spent the last 70 years violently stopping Central American countries from setting up stable social democracies. That any time there was a people-powered movement in any of those countries that moved remotely toward challenging the power of the oligarchs in those countries, the U.S.-backed oligarchs in that country, we would fund death squads. We would massacre the population there. We would prop up right-wing dictatorships. Up to the present day. This is not exactly a policy that we've moved away from. The U.S. was linked to the coup in Bolivia recently. Was linked to the coup in in Honduras in 2009. This is not distant history that we're talking about. And so if that's the history, then the answer is, well, okay, then the U.S. needs to offer people sanctuary from the problems that the U.S. has created. Like I said, that's not something that is remotely getting talked about in kind of the American political system. And so it was predicted that if Trump lost, you would have a spike in border crossings, and particularly on unaccompanied minors, and you're starting to see that. The problem that the U.S. system has is that it doesn't just simply unite those children with their family here in the U.S. because it has all of these draconian barriers thrown up. Because there's a decent chance that the person that they're trying to unite with is themselves undocumented, and so that creates all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles. If they just treated themselves as kind of a humanitarian outpost that said, here is a child that we have found in the desert who needs to find their family, and you say to the child, who is your family who can help take care of you? The child will tell you, here's who it is, here's what their number is, here's what their address is, and a benevolent government would say, okay, let us connect you with them. And you link and you reunite those families. That just basic Samaritan practice is such a radical concept that it's not something that either party is going to even contemplate. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, what kind of prison can we build for them? What kind of cage can we build for them?
And that's essentially what it is. I mean, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You'll see like these glowing reports, and it's pretty disgusting because I see the same media pundits who had very brutal feedback for the Trump administration over the use of these types of facilities, now using the same kind of language that we heard from Laura Ingraham when she was trying to refer to these facilities as fun summer camps. They're not fun summer camps, they're being detained. Luckily, this particular facility is not run by a for-profit prison, but it is not a licensed facility. Since it's considered a temporary facility, it doesn't have to be licensed, and I think that that's incredibly problematic considering that we have children being kept there. But I love that you talked about the actual issue that's led to the symptoms that we're experiencing now, right? Because look, there's certainly been a number of cases with the United States meddling in other countries, destabilizing other countries, leading to crises in other countries, which of course leads to migrants looking for safety here. And then of course we have these draconian laws and bureaucratic hurdles which prevent connecting these kids with their family members here in the United States. But when you look at the Biden administration, he's certainly no better. One of the first things that he said in regard to foreign policy after he got elected was that he was unwilling to recognize the actual leader of Venezuela, and he mentioned Juan Guaido. He recognizes Juan Guaido as the leader of Venezuela. The people of Venezuela don't consider him the leader. Like, what are you doing? You can't just pick and choose who leads any particular country. So it's just a continuation of a pattern that we've seen in regard to foreign policy with the United States. And then, you might not know the answer to this question, so I apologize for just springing it up on you, but I am curious. Would Biden be able to unilaterally do something about this? Like if he wanted to, could he bypass Congress and just do away with the hurdles in order to connect these kids with their family members in the United States?
So I mean, what he could do fairly quickly would be to issue a memo saying that it's the policy of the United States that unaccompanied minors who cross the border will be united with family members in the United States as quickly as possible, and that policy, that effort, is not remotely connected to any attempts to identify or deport those family members. So you absolutely could do that. Like he could do that, and you could take that 102 days, and you could take it down to 2 days. And I think everybody would agree, if you find a child in a desert and they have to spend a day in a facility, before they get reunited with their family, great. That's an actual decent use of government to benefit families. But beyond that, you can't go anywhere near that. And I think anybody who wants to really understand this could Google an old Alexander Cockburn article. It's like a satirical article, I think from like the 1980s. That's in Harper's Magazine. You can still find it online, and it's this satirical argument between a conservative and a liberal in the 1840s over slavery. And the conservative is arguing, why slavery is such a good thing, it's better for everybody involved. And the liberal is complaining about the conditions that the slaves are living under, and that they need better regulation, that they need to be fed better, they need to be treated better. And at the very end, an abolitionist comes in and says, well, we actually believe that one human being should not own another human being. And then they say, well, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for showing up. And so that's the kind of debate that we're having now, is like, should the conditions that children are being caged in be better, or should they be awful? And sure, they should be better, but it's still putting children in cages.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, these temporary facilities, none of it makes sense. It's cruel, it's costly. The argument that we hear from some of the more hardliners regarding immigration is that, well, we have such limited resources and we can't just let anyone into the country. But for some reason, we seem to have absolutely no problem detaining both children and adult migrants for months and months at a time. This particular facility charges, I can't even believe how much this is, $775 a day per child. A temporary facility costs that. And then
the Ritz, that Cruz was going to take his family to. He did take his family to, for his entire family. The Ritz in Cancun was gonna be $309 a night for his whole family.
I mean, how are you gonna pass up that deal though, Ryan? Maybe we're being a little too hard on Ted Cruz,
Right, for twice that much, there was a facility right in his state that he could have gone to, or that could have taken his children to at least.
It's so depressing and so devastating. And look, for me and for anyone who's actually honest in the media, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat who's utilizing these facilities or continuing these pretty awful immigration policies. If Biden is willing to reopen a facility that Trump got a lot of backlash for, well, then Biden deserves the backlash as well. And I don't know why it is that liberals are so afraid to do the right thing when it comes to immigration. Who are they afraid of? Are they afraid of their own constituents coming after them? I mean, what does Biden have to lose by making the decision to connect these people, these children, to their family members in the US as quickly as possible? Like, what is what's the loss politically? Do you think there is one?
It's an interesting question, and so and part of it is a dated understanding of politics, and goes back to to the 2000s when you saw this kind of anti-immigrant backlash. I think that today's kind of white suburban voter is much more sympathetic to immigration across the board than they were 10, 15 years ago. And so you could get away with that. A lot of working class black voters have legitimately seen wages pushed down. Like you see these studies and they're real, and even if they're not real, there is certainly a perception among a lot of working class black voters that there is, and working class white voters absolutely, but Democrats have kind of given up on them, that there is some sort of competition between immigration and wages. And so that is in the back of the mind of some of these politicians as they're thinking about these issues. And when they're very worried about kind of the images at the border of thousands of people coming across, and that's why Trump was so eager to elevate these different caravans that are like coming through Guatemala or Honduras or Mexico to try to scare people. It doesn't work as well as it used to, but it does trigger in people this idea that there's somebody at the gates that's going to uproot that's going to uproot what they have known and loved about their daily life. And so politicians don't like change. And immigration represents change. So it's really complicated for Democrats in that sense. They haven't ever kind of fully leaned into it. And I think people were a little bit confused about Democrats during the Trump era, thinking like, oh, this is a pro-immigrant, this is a left-wing party because of how energetically and profusely they were attacking Trump over these policies. But no, they were hostile to Trump. And so you remove Trump from that equation, and all of a sudden they revert back to some of their more nativist tendencies that they have.
Yeah, it's incredible. At the same time, Joe Biden has proposed immigration reform, which would indicate that there'd be a pathway if this passes. And of course, I don't have much hope that it will, but he's proposing an 8-year pathway to citizenship for immigrants who are undocumented in the United States right now. I feel like he put that proposal out simultaneously. It was, as he's reopening this facility, as he's kind of continuing on with some of the deportations that he promised to kind of scale back on, and then he comes out with this proposal. Again, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, especially with some of the other pretty big economic proposals that are currently being debated in Congress right now. But this is an important story, so we'll definitely keep an eye on it for you guys.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.